Let's call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Ms. Drummond?
Present.
Mr. Birch? Ms. Gray-Jackson?
Honored to be here.
Ms. Johnston?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Present.
Mr. Starr?
Here.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Honeman? Mr. Gutierrez?
Here.
Ms. Osiander?
Here.
Chair Trainee?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Osander, could you lead us in the pledge, ma'am, please?
I pledge
Thank you, ma'am. There are no minutes of previous meetings. We're now down to the mayor's report. Mr. Mayor is designated representative. Mr. Michaelis?
No report, thank you.
Okay. Nothing from the Assembly Chair. Committee reports? Harriet? Any reports, ma'am?
Chair, thank you.
Elvie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee. The Audit Committee met today at noon, and all the members were present, with the OMB Director, who was present by phone, along with the contractor. And as you all know, the purpose of this meeting was to review and discuss the draft forensic audit report, basically for errors, clarifications, and inaccuracies. And since the report is still in draft form and was in draft form at that point, the report had to remain confidential. Therefore, we went into executive session, and after we went into executive session, the committee provided feedback by way of questions and answers. And normally, after executive sessions, you set a date certain when the tapes would be released, but because the open discussion for this particular executive session might tend to injure the reputation of persons, there was no release date set for the tape to be released. And as it stands right now, the audit today, right this very moment, remains in draft form until the contractor revises the document. But it's anticipated that it will be final tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, and the document is going to be emailed to Peter Askins, and I believe our attorney. Peter Askins is the internal auditor, and then it's going to be distributed to Assembly members and the mayor so that folks can have it prior to our work session on Friday at noon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Elvie, when are the Assembly members going to get a copy of this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I thought I just said was that Thursday. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Thursday, I believe the auditor is going to email copies to Assembly members and also have copies available, hard copies available in the clerk's office. So Thursday morning, and if I'm not correct, Mr. Raskins or Ms. Tucker, please correct me on that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. To the clerk, would you make sure that every Assembly member gets called so we can get copies to them? I understand, Peter, that the document itself is 4 inches thick. Is that correct? Okay. So it'll be some interesting reading. 4 inches thick is an interesting document to go over. And we have a work session set up on Friday at noon, and I put 2 hours towards it, and we will extend that meeting as we need to. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Trainee, is there a specific time that we could go pick it up, or how is that going to work?
Peter, do you have any? Come to the microphone if you would. I'd like to get you on the record. Peter's our internal auditor.
Through the chair, when I get the report emailed to me, possibly tomorrow or latest Thursday morning, then I'll get with the clerk and we'll email the electronic version to each Assembly member, and we'll have a hard copy in the clerk's office if you want it there.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Could you just let us know when there's a hard copy? I can't picture reading over email a 4-inch thick document.
Right, that's why we're going to have the hard copies available.
Okay, so you'll give a call, or somebody will give us a call, Jacqueline?
That's correct. The clerk's going to call everybody when it comes in.
I'll have the clerk office call you, ma'am.
Super, thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
the document that the audit committee reviewed is only 30 pages long, and then there was an additional sort of a transcript of interviews that wasn't even that long. We did not see a 4-inch thick document. I believe that's backup material.
I know,
So
but I was told
don't-
earlier that on Thursday we'll have the full-blown version. So we'll see. Yes, Elby? Okay. Thank you. So that's where we're at on it. Thank you, Elby, for telling us what the audit committee did, and we've been joined by Mr. Birch.
You're welcome.
Welcome, sir. Any committee report, Mr. Birch, anything? Okay. Jennifer? Pat? How's our port doing?
Doing very well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. We had another Holland America ship in on Monday. Similarly, on Monday we met and went over a variety of topics, including a budget update and a timeline update. One of the pertinent topics was the review of last year's work. The inspection process is ongoing. We're going to get a report on that next month. We also expect to have some discussions on the seismic aspects of the port, just to bring members up to speed who perhaps have not been through that process before. We're also going to get an update on some potential modifications to the project that would address some of the concerns that one of the port users, Total Motion Trailer Express, has about the temporary merge at the northern extension. And finally, Mr. Chairman, that date for the next meeting is still in flux. We'll either meet in the first week of September, or perhaps toward the end of September, based on some travel schedules. And we'll update you on that when we know more.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Starr, sir?
Yeah, Budget and Finance Committee is going to meet this Thursday, and we're taking up a pretty significant topic as it relates to a budget deficit item, and that's relating to our building safety and developmental services. It's Fund 181, as most of you are aware of that, and we were alerted through a revenue shortfall, fairly significant revenue shortfall from the Treasury group. And so I put a note of sincerity to it. It's something that the Assembly needs to handle in terms of a solution. That said, I'm getting great support and great response for the preliminary data that we're going to need as we go into the decision-making. But quite frankly, I think we're going to need to address as this body an appropriation perhaps in fourth quarter therein, and then also additional policy statements. We'll start to flesh that out this Thursday. All are welcome. It's initially I was going to set up an overall work session, but I think that will probably be a month from now when we can perhaps posture a solution joint with the Assembly and the administration on this. But we are upside down in that fund, and it's relating to the lack of building permits and additional expenses exceeding revenues. So that's about as direct speak as we can, and that topic will take place noon on Thursday, and we'll hopefully bring some information back to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. It's important that you're leading this effort because we're concerned about where the money's going and where the money's coming from, and we hate to get upside down in any area, given what we saw the last year or so. Mr. Hall, sir?
Yes, the Community and Economic Development Committee had a meeting last Friday, work session in regards to the Campbell Creek estuary. We had presentations from the mayor as well as Phil Shepard with the Great Land Trust. I think it was very informative for all of the Assembly to be up to speed on everything that's involved in that particular transaction. And I am working on a resolution that I will lay on the table at our next meeting. Also, I'll be bringing a resolution forward at that time in regards to the Anchorage United for Youth Summit that's going to be occurring here on September the 18th. That will give our youth the chance to get together to make our community a better place for young children. So I'll have that coming forward.
Thank you, Ernie. Paul, welcome to the meeting, sir. Note your presence is here for the record.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, a little traffic delay after we came back from the Rasmussen Foundation reception. Thought I could get here earlier. Car crash, and reverting back to my former occupation, I almost attempted to stop on it, but no injuries. I can happy to report.
I noticed yesterday when you and I were walking to Chester Valley, you put your hand up to stop traffic. I do appreciate that. Crossing guard.
Old habits die hard, Mr. Chair. So public safety meeting was conducted last Wednesday. We discussed some potential ordinance changes, one relating to skateboards on the school grounds or potentially on all municipally owned building properties, not parks, but properties, noting that there are some skateboard parks out available for the public to use. Also, there's a somewhat, I guess you'd say controversial, or at least some heated and very excited persons on the bicycle ordinances in their Title IX. I guess Title IX is actually being rewritten. They're about half done, according to the administration, about half done, and looking forward to working with the administration and their working team on getting some information, particularly to note the chapter on bicycles and one particular ordinance that pertains to right-of-way at driveways. Is you might have gotten this body, you might have gotten some calls or some emails from people. And then another ordinance pertaining to 880 in changing the number of calls, but calendar year versus consecutive months, because you could get a person moving into a location in September of a given year and have 7 calls by December, and January 1st the calendar year starts over. And it appears that there's a state law that would need to be modified in order for this body to change our code for city code. So we're looking at a few things there. And there's also some pending issues coming up next month. We may be, for the next meeting, by the way, would be Wednesday, September 8th. It looks like most of Assembly members, including members of this committee, think noon is the better time. We only had one actual, myself, and then another Assembly person actually was not actually on the Public Safety Committee. So we'll probably be meeting at noon, and we'll try that and see if that works for the accommodation for the at least the majority of the Public Safety Committee, and looking at issues with bars, and particularly downtown bars.
Thank you, Paul. Mike?
No report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Debbie?
Somehow, the S version that we had prepared of wind towers and
On the wind tower one, I saw a message come through that the S is not going to be here tonight.
Right. I was going to announce, if anybody came for that I'm going to move to postpone that, or if the chair can, until our next meeting where we'll have that available at that time.
I was looking forward to that, Debbie. I was on the web and found a neat little area where you can punch your location in, and it will tell you if your house is in the right area to have a wind power system put in. You put your whole address in, and it brings it up on the map and tells you what the wind pattern is there and whether you're qualified for it, having a wind generator there or not.
You'll have to share that site with me, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to see it. The other thing I want to announce is we had a very productive committee meeting last week. Actually, we had a very productive meeting where we finished comments on Chapter 14, which is the definition section. Mm-hmm. So hopefully the staff will have time to review and come back with suggestions to get another version on Chapter 14 soon. So.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Appreciate it. And just for the body, I'm going to Kodiak tomorrow morning. We have AML meeting there. So I'm flying out tomorrow morning to Kodiak, and I'll be back Thursday night at 11:50 so I can read this interesting audit report. Next item in business, we're down to addendum to the agenda. If I get a motion to incorporate.
Second.
I'll go through it. Item 9A1, write that on your agenda. Actually, it's on your screen. This is a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly honoring and remembering United States Senator Ted Stevens. Item 9A2, AR 2010-242, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly supporting the Anchorage Firefighters Annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise as a community event of de minimis extra expense to the municipality. Yeah. Item 9B5, resolution AR 2010-229, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly appointing a citizen naming panel for the 9th Avenue pathway. Item 9B6, resolution AR 2010-241, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its protest regarding new restaurant eating place liquor license number 5000 and restaurant designation permit for Hugo J. Jimenez, Doing business as the Grape Leaf, located at 302 West Fireweed, and authorizing the municipal clerk to take certain action. Under bid awards, item 9C1, a same memorandum, AM 454, 2010, recommendation of award to Pru's Construction Incorporated, LLC, for 40th Avenue Extension, Lake Otis Parkway to Dale Street, for the Municipality of Anchorage Project Management and Engineering Department. It's ITB 2010 C044, $9,070,013.22. Item 9C2 is memorandum AM 455, 2010, recognition award to Bristol Construction Services, LLC, for South Gamble Street drainage, 120 Avenue to Clatt Road, for the Municipality of Anchorage Project Management and Engineering, ITB 2010 C045, $893,853.80. Under new businesses, item 9D8, memorandum AM 451, 2010, change order number 1 to purchase order number 2010496 with Emerald Alaska, Inc., for the Municipality of Anchorage Municipal Light and Power, $175,770.05. Item 9D9 is memorandum AM 453, 2010, recommendation of award to Dowell HKM to provide professional subsurface soil exploration services for the Municipality of Anchorage, Project Management and Engineering Department, 2010-P008, $656,700. Under information and reports, there's item 9E5, information memorandum AM 85, 2010, monthly investment report to the Assembly, June 2010 finance. Is there anything else that needs to be laid on the table?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd like to add an AM to item 14D, and it's AO 2010-54, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Section 1.15035, to provide additional restrictions on employment of elected officials for 1 year after leaving municipal service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What number, Ms. Jackson?
14D is the ordinance.
14B?
D, like dog.
D? Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supporting document. Anything else that needs here's one. Is there anything else that needs added to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I may have been asleep at the switch, but I just wanted to make sure that the resolution AR 2010-243 regarding Senator Stevens was mentioned. I didn't hear that.
Already did.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Not a problem. I was running a little fast, but I did mention it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just a clarification on AR number 2010-242. You listed that as A2, although on the item it says it's 9 Bravo 7. It is actually A2, is that correct?
It's 9 Bravo 7, she tells me.
It is 9 Bravo 7. Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry. The clerk corrected me. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Anything else needs added to the addendum? Seeing nothing, ask unanimous consent on the incorporation of the addendum to the agenda. Seeing no objection, we've amended the document in front of us. I now need a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Let me bring mine up. Okay. Now I'll go through semi-members to pull those things on the administration. Debbie, is there anything you want to pull, ma'am?
I'd like to pull B4 and B7.
B4 and what?
7.
B7?
There is no 7. Where's there 7?
Which one? Okay. We're working on it. Thank you, Debbie. What's the number of it again? Okay. Is that all, ma'am? Mr. Gutierrez, sir?
No items, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Paul, anything?
9 Delta 8, 9D8. for purpose of discussion.
On the addendum, sir.
Yeah. Mr. Hall, sir?
No items.
Mr. Starr, sir?
9 Charlie 1 and 9 Echo 3. Charlie 1 is for purpose of conflict.
Okay, got Charlie 1. What's the other one?
Echo 3.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it was Echo 5.
Thank you.
Nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Elvie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Ms. Osiander pulled an item I was going to pull, the 9B7, the fill the boot.
Yes.
Is that correct? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Starr, sir? Sorry. Mr. Burt, sir?
No items.
Harriet?
No items, thank you.
Thank you. I just need to divulge to the body, we do have one item that I need to let you know about. It's an informational memorandum. It deals with item 9E2. It's 959. Of course, I have a few sons, but one of them happens to be the executive of that organization, executive manager. But it's not a conflict of interest because this doesn't relate to a contractor in front of us. This is just an informational memorandum. If this was something that we were approving, I would probably have to tell you I'd be less than objective. When it's your child, no matter what age they are, you're less than objective. Just to let the body know. Mr. Michaelis, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm good. I'm good to go. Thank you.
Ask unanimous consent on the consent agenda. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we've approved. Those items that were not pulled for further discussion will now go back to those items that were pulled. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am?
since we did not pull the Senator Stevens resolution, and since there's important events occurring today in response to him, and since we've also lost other people with plane crashes, thinking particularly about the C-17, I would like to ask that the Assembly observe a moment of silence for the fine folks that we've lost just recently.
That would be fine, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Senator Stevens was an inspiration to this state. He shepherded where the state is now. I used to go back when part of AML, and we could always get in to see Senator Stevens. And no matter what he was doing, he had time to talk to us about Anchorage issues, and he knew the issues in front of Alaska and Anchorage. We're going to miss him. He was an outstanding individual. So I think we all have some interesting times when we were back there seeing him. We'll now go on to those items that are pulled for a little further discussion. The first one.
I'm sorry.
Go
Move
ahead,
to
ma'am.
approve B4.
What?
Move to approve the resolution to support the comprehensive federal clean energy legislation. That's the first
Second.
one, I believe.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I do certainly believe that we need to have a plan for basically our energy future. We've had a lot of discussions about that on this body, and I know the mayor's had a task force that's met for some time on energy efficiency. I had a brief conversation with the sponsor here, because my main concern with this resolution is, to me, the main impetus for creating a plan is so that we can extend the sustainability of energy for our communities in the future. and it only makes sense to look at alternatives. Some of the whereases in this document didn't speak as clearly to me. In particular, the fourth whereas, where it talks about global climate change being a specific risk and stressor to soldiers deployed from Fort Richardson and Elmendorf. My comfort with this whole resolution would increase if that could be deleted. And I think if the sponsor, I think she's okay with that. The main thrust, I don't think, of the resolution is harmed by that. But to me, the main stressor and risk for soldiers deployed are bombs and guns, not climate change. So I would very much like to delete the fourth whereas.
To the maker of the motion.
Mr. Chair, if I could speak to that briefly.
Go ahead, ma'am.
My entire intent in bringing forward this resolution was because I heard several weeks ago, about half a dozen retired military folks speak at the Denina Center on this very issue. And yesterday in the paper there was a community editorial piece by one of these gentlemen. And what I learned at this event was that the U.S. Department of Defense is the largest energy user in the world. The second largest user of energy is the U.S. Air Force, and the third largest is the U.S. Navy. They are going to proceed with working on climate change issues, whether we pass this resolution or not. But my entire intent was to bring attention to the issues that the Department of Defense is facing, considering that the Department of Defense has about, 10% of our population is military. If we don't get moving, they're going to spend a lot more time dealing with climate issues than they are with guns and bombs. And I would prefer to leave that in there. The backup material to this resolution, which I looked for, demonstrates why the military must deal with climate change. And one of the most astounding statistics that these folks brought forward was that a gallon of gas that costs us $3.30 or $3.40 here, depending on where you buy it, costs $400 to bring 1 gallon of gas to the front lines in Iraq from the base. That is simply unbelievable, and they've got to be working on this issue, and this was to encourage our federal delegation to get to work on climate energy, clean energy. These guys have been dragging their feet, and we need to move forward. So I'd prefer to leave it in.
Debbie?
I guess Ms. Drummond and I had a miscommunication. I thought that if the third whereas was left, she was okay with this, but I guess that's not the case. Harriet?
I'd prefer to leave it in, but if it means that you can't vote for it, then I might listen to removing it. But I'd like to hear some more.
Which whereas are we talking about?
The fourth one.
Debbie? The fourth one? If you want to make a motion, ma'am, we'd appreciate it.
Well, I did, and I didn't get a second, so I did get a second? Oh, pardon me.
You've got a second, Ms. Johnston.
All right. Oh, well, I'll just reiterate. I think for me the main thrust, though I appreciate the concern and where Ms. Drummond is coming from, for me the main thrust is sustainability. And I don't think it's correct to say that it's a primary risk factor to our soldiers who are deployed. For me, that's so far down compared to bullets and guns. It's just...
Thank you. Ms. Johnston, you're next on the queue.
I think all of us can agree that we need to go in this direction as far as sustainability. I find it interesting because actually Department of Defense has been probably one of the major divisions within the federal government that has been promoting conservation. It's been said that we can do more by conservation than we can do by any other renewable forms of energy. And DOD has been on the top of conservation now for over 10 years and has actually been probably leading the charge because they are one of the largest consumers of energy. So I'm kind of this kind of confuses me because I know that they are putting a lot of work into conservation particularly.
Thank you. Ms. Gray-Jackson? On the motion to drop that out?
Mr. Chairman. No, I just want to thank Ms. Drummond for bringing this resolution forward, because I personally realize how important renewable energy is and excited about the city of Accutan where I work, and they're out there drilling for geothermal right now. And I really want to thank Ms. Drummond for explaining the paragraph that Ms. Oceana wanted to have removed, because I don't think it should be, but I would be happy to follow your lead, Ms. Drummond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gutierrez, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to dig into this a little more deeply, and I presume, Ms. Oceana, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about the whereas that begins on line 15?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think that perhaps we're misreading this, and I think that's the fundamental problem here. Nobody's saying in this paragraph that global climate change is a primary stressor or risk factor. No, that's not said anywhere in this. What it says is the Department of Defense, not the author of this resolution, the Department of Defense has identified global climate change as a national security threat that brings additional risks and stressors to United States service members. The way I read that is to say because of global climate change, our soldiers are going to be facing more guns and bombs. I think everybody agrees that's the primary risk factor. But that they're going to be facing more of it unless we do something about this. And again, it's not the author of this resolution that has said that. It is the Department of Defense that has said that their personnel are going to be more often in harm's way or at greater risk the less we do about this particular issue. And I think because that is coming from the DOD, and I think they are the authoritative voice on what the risk factors and stressors are to service members, then I think this paragraph really ought to stay in the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Karras. There's nobody else in the queue, so I'm going to bring up the voting screen. Please vote. That item will not be eliminated in that particular resolution. Vote was 7-4 against deleting it. We now have in front of us 2010-240 as it was introduced. Is there any amendments to it? Is there any objection to this item? Notice one objection, Mr. Starman. What? I was going to, okay, I can bring it up then. Please vote on it. There. That item was approved.
Thank you.
Next item in front of us is item 9B7, AR 2010-242. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly supporting the Anchorage firefighters' annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise as a community event, a de minimis extra expense to the municipality.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Jackson?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to take a moment and read this ordinance, this resolution, for a couple of reasons. I'd like to read it into the record. I mean, we just got the resolution today, and I just think it's important to read this into the record. And I also think it's important because this is something that has been hanging out there since May. And the mayor's new policy, it was supposed to be available last Friday. But anyway, this is the position of, right now, the three folks who are sponsors of this resolution. So here I go. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly supporting the Anchorage firefighters' annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise as a community event of de minimis extra expense to the municipality. Whereas Fill the Boot has been an exercise endorsed by the municipality and undertaken by the Anchorage firefighters as a community event since 1981. And whereas once a year for 3 hours between the hours of 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on the Friday before Labor Day, Anchorage firefighters have been joined by community volunteers to raise money to fight muscular dystrophy. And whereas, since 1954, firefighters in cities all across the United States and Canada have made Fill the Boot a community fundraising event to support families stricken with this disabling neuromuscular disease. And whereas, every year, more local governments join in to show support for their firefighters by endorsing and participating in a local Fill the Boot community event. And whereas, since 1981, the municipality of Anchorage has endorsed and supported this event by staging at-ready fire trucks in areas within the fire station district at no extra expense to the municipality. And whereas the fire trucks and associated crew members are from on-duty stations where the firefighters would be in paid on-duty status and housed at the station awaiting a potential call-out to respond. And whereas, once a year, several fire trucks and associated firefighter crew members, not all, have been allowed by the municipal fire chief to serve their on-duty status during the 3-hour window from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., together with their at-ready fire truck in case of call-out outside the fire station instead of housed inside the fire station. And whereas this 3-hour portion of the participating firefighter shift has been served with no extra expense to the municipality. And whereas, during the annual 3-hour community event, the on-duty fire trucks and associated firefighter crew members are joined within the fire station district by off-duty firefighters, other off-duty public safety personnel, and community supporters in raising money and awareness to fight off this debilitating neuromuscular disease. And whereas muscular dystrophy strikes families in Anchorage just as it does families in communities throughout Alaska and across America. And whereas Anchorage community families who have suffered the disease of muscular dystrophy are significantly helped by the work of Anchorage firefighters in this annual 3-hour community event and in the annual summer camp for muscular dystrophy staffed with the help of Anchorage firefighter volunteers. And whereas funds raised by the Anchorage firefighters during Fill the Boot are administered by the Muscular Dystrophy Association under an open-door policy accessible to all sufferers of the disease. And whereas, without assistance from MDA Alaska, many sufferers of muscular dystrophy in our community and their families would be without adequate assistance resources, and this would hurt the community as a whole in many direct and indirect ways. And whereas the fundraising model used by Anchorage firefighters in Fill the Boot leverages the community's support for its firefighters to directly benefit the sufferers of muscular dystrophy at no increase in government expense. And whereas in 2010, AO 2010-39 and AO 2010-44-S1 established a street solicitation permitting process and clarified the local governing body's intent not to prohibit the municipality's continued participation in staging fire trucks out of the station in at-ready status during the 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise. And whereas it is not unusual for public and private entities to pay for team-building exercise to relieve the stress and depression that many otherwise befall first responders, such as firefighters, by the very nature of their work. And whereas the Assembly and the Mayor have engaged in separate and joint efforts to review and delineate legislative policy and administrative procedure regarding various community events in fairness to all concerned. Now, therefore, be it resolved that after review of the foregoing considerations, the Anchorage Assembly makes the following findings and recommendations. 1. The Anchorage Municipal Assembly finds the Anchorage Firefighters' annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise is a community event of de minimis extra expense to the municipality. 2. Absent declaration to the contrary under oath before the Assembly by the Anchorage Fire Chief, the Assembly finds no reason to believe that public safety is at jeopardy if several at-ready fire trucks are staged within fire station districts instead of inside the fire station during the annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise. 3. Absent declaration to the contrary under oath before the Assembly by the Anchorage Fire Chief, the Assembly acknowledges the stress inherent to services as a first responder and finds the annual 3-hour Fill the Boot exercise is appropriate to team building, consistent with principles of esprit de corps, and beneficial to the health and safety of Anchorage firefighters who serve the municipality as first responders. 4. Since 1981, the municipality of Anchorage has supported the Anchorage firefighters' endorsement of the fight against muscular dystrophy by making this community event complete with at-ready fire trucks and associated crew members, uniformed off-duty firefighters, and community volunteers. 5, the Anchorage Municipal Assembly calls on the community of Anchorage to support its local firefighters by generously filling the boot during this annual 3-hour event. Number 6, the Anchorage Municipal Assembly looks to the mayor to ensure that Anchorage firefighters are supported in this annual 3-hour community event with the placement of at-ready fire trucks within the fire station district as allowed under past practice, and policies and procedures that acknowledge and reflect the willingness of Anchorage firefighters to focus firefighter community support to fight muscular dystrophy. B, the historical relationship between Anchorage firefighters and the fight against muscular dystrophy. And C, the health and safety benefit to the community when there is an identifiable community event that also serves as a team-building exercise for first responders at de minimis expense to the municipality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, shut my microphone off. Ms. Osander, on this particular resolution?
Basically, what's happening is exactly what I feared would happen with the passage of the last ordinance, and that is the Assembly is basically making its decision that we should decide how staff within the department are allocated, that we should decide what appropriate team building for a department is. And unfortunately, I think that it crosses the boundary of responsibilities laid out in the charter for the Assembly and for the mayor. Basically, the mayor is the administrator, and we are policy and budget, and this crosses the line. There is one part of this resolution that I do wholeheartedly support, and that is that we urge the community to support Fill the Boot. I think that's an absolutely worthwhile thing to do. However, I think we are crossing the line here on what is appropriate. It's a separation of powers issue that is not being done correctly. I do not want to get in the business of saying we're going to use this departmental staff for this purpose. It's not our purview. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Birch, sir?
Yeah, I would echo the comments of Ms. Osander. I will not be supporting this. First of all, I object to getting a 4-page, first of all, reading it into the record, very time-consuming. But it just showed up this afternoon, and I do not have a hard copy. I was fortunate enough to pull up a copy on the screen here this evening. But something like this, it's helpful if you can get it somewhat ahead of time. In the first place. But I would agree with the comments Ms. Osander advanced. I think if our mayor has responsibility, he's been elected to supervise the city and our employees, and I think we need to defer to the mayor in this case. It's inappropriate for us to be assigning work duties and basically affirming the beneficiaries of municipal employee time and resources. I will not be supporting this, and I think we really need to recognize that these times we identified as de minimis, but in fact there's all sorts of things to be done around a station. I mean, there's maintenance type work. There's any number of alternative things that could be dedicated to constructive purpose, and I just think this is not the idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what assembly body the last two speakers are serving on, or believe they're serving on.
Mr. Honeman, please.
I believe that I was elected by my folks in my district to represent, and we do ring in and set policy. In fact, I read into the charter and the roles and responsibilities that we do set policy and we do set guidance to the administration as to how to spend money. And there may be differences, and when there are differences, of course, we hope that there's respect, and oftentimes there's a little bit of a seesaw. And of course, as we've noted recently, that the mayor has an authority under the charter to veto ordinances that this body presents, and this body likewise has charter authority to override those vetoes. And so I'm not surprised they're not supporting this resolution, but it's disappointing that I think it was said earlier, that we've not really given this municipality, our citizens, good government over this issue, and this is not even an issue that should have been an issue. This is a great effort, and I'm supporting it. I'm glad to support it.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on Ms. Osiander's first concern as far as what little slippery slope we're going on. And to be honest with you, when this issue first came up, I didn't realize it was an issue as much as I've heard through constituents. And I've been surprised as far as some of the constituents. It's not one conservative or liberal. It's sort of been across the board, which surprised me. But in talking with the administration, I'd like to ask I understand that a lot of the requests for employees to do nonprofit fundraising or contribute to nonprofits with their time goes through our HR department. And I would like to have Ms. Usera explain to us or discuss if this sets a precedent. Have you had employees come to you and point out the fill the boot as a precedent? And could you, anyways, discuss that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnston, the Employee Relations Department does get requests from multiple organizations to provide some type of support. Sometimes it's in-kind support, come read in the classrooms, or to support particular what we would consider to be community activities, and others are fundraising, to invite municipal employees to fundraising events. It puts us in a very difficult position because of the equal access principles of public sector, is to be able to say that all organizations are going to have equal access to municipal employees for the purposes of raising funds for their organization. Generally, we have simply said no. Unless there is municipal purpose associated with it, for example, a program that's in the library to support the libraries, we have simply said no, we're not going to distribute that type of information. It puts us in a very difficult position when you start picking and choosing. So far, the policies that have been in place have been fairly clear, and we've been able to follow them. I don't think that this particular event is necessarily considered a precedent. It was always considered sort of the exception. And it does, and quite honestly, because of a lot of the public debate, it does open up that issue of equal access. And is it fair for all nonprofit organizations for one to be able to get preferential treatment and others not to? I hope that responds to your question.
Ms. Johnston? Is that all, ma'am?
Just, there's one other question I have, a follow-up, and this is with Mr. Wheeler. Ms. Elvie Gray Jackson mentioned that she's yet to see the policy. And I know that there's a draft policy, and I know that it was also released to the press. And could you give me an update of where that policy is?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Johnston, we had a meeting with United Way this morning and discussed a portion of the policy that had to do with continuing the employee contribution program, and discussed with the United Way ways to minimize the use of employee time to coordinate the program and increase United Way's efforts in that area. With that meeting and what we learned from that meeting, I was instructed to revise the policy with respect to that portion. And Deputy Westover worked on some edits as well, which I've just identified that she's finished. So with those two issues addressed, the policy, as I understand it, would be available if the Assembly wishes to have it.
Do you see a conflict, or are we, is it apples and oranges, or a conflict versus the policy that you have presently for the fire department as far as fill the boot versus United Way with all employees? Could you address sort of the difference, if there is a difference?
Through the chair, The use of firefighters while on duty, as I understand it, involves a significant commitment of time, and it focuses on a donation to a specific identified nonprofit. The employee fundraiser campaign focuses on using much less time, but more importantly, it focuses on an umbrella organization through a long-standing formal written policy that doesn't exclude groups that meet the criteria, nor does it favor any single nonprofit.
Anything else, ma'am? We need to get on with tonight. I've still got some people that want to speak on this. Mr. Hall, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been in total support of the firemen and MDA all the way through up to this point, but this evening I have to tend to go with Ms. Osiander in her comments. I feel that we've made a statement we object, and now we're coming back and saying that we strongly object. And I'm sorry, but I will be voting no on this one.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gutierrez, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of points. One, again, I'm going back to some things Mr. Birch had said several minutes ago. I think we're reading things into this document that aren't actually there in black and white. On the last page, the very first line, point number 6, the first sentence begins, "The Anchorage Municipal Assembly looks to the mayor," not requests of the mayor, not requires of the mayor, not the mayor shall do this. The Assembly looks to the mayor. Well, we're leaving it in the mayor's court. The other, there are a few terms I've jotted down during the course of the discussion. Ms. Usera used the phrase equal access, and that she's put in a difficult position. I guarantee you're going to be put into a much more difficult position after this, because Ms. Osiander's right. We are picking and choosing, but it's actually the opposite of what she's talking about. Now, Mr. Wheeler addressed the United Way campaign, and that it's not a significant commitment of time to a specific organization. We do a lot of specific commitments of time, and more than time, tremendous resources to specific organizations. The minute one municipal employee spends time using municipal resources, a municipal vehicle, or anything else belonging to the municipality while they are paid on municipal time to help for Rendezvous, to help the Iditarod, to help Bear Paw, then we've violated that equal access philosophy that Ms. Usera brought forward. I think that we're setting ourselves up for a real fall here. Now, I know the mayor's allies on the Assembly are going to bend over backwards to help him on this. This is something he really wants, and that's fine.
Keep the discussion on this resolution.
And I am, actually, Mr. Chairman, I am. I kind of know how the vote's going to go on this, and I know how ultimately things are going to go with regard to fill the boot. But we're setting the city up for a big fall on these things that should never have been an issue. Ever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sarcer, just on this particular resolution.
I am just on this resolution, and the difference tonight is that we're not accusing the firemen of unethical behavior. So what we're saying, and we're not going to accuse those of breaking the ethics law if they partake in Bear Paw. That's what we were trying to do last time. The approach on the ethics wasn't the appropriate manner. This isn't appropriate either because it starts to drift into, as Ms. Osiander said, areas outside of our purview. Policy setting is one thing. Ethics code, ethics policy statements therein are appropriate. But what we're going to get from the administration is a clear policy directive, and I'm happy for that. my question to the administration is, does it go beyond just the unit as it relates to the firemen? Are you getting ready to handle the rest of the employee work units with the policy statement, or are we trying to be specific only to this group for now?
If I may.
Mr. Michaelis?
This is employee-wide. It's not any one particular employee group. It's employee-wide. And the other thing I'd like to clarify, and thank you for your comments, Mr. Gutierrez, but just to clarify, there is a difference between supporting a community event versus outright employees soliciting funds for an event. And so that's where the distinction, and thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Starr?
No, just the statement. We don't actually have to approve the policy that the administration's putting forth. That would be my interpretation.
No, we do not
approve. Executive branch government decision, and I'm happy to let them make it.
The policy procedure manual is written by the executive branch. We do not write it. We do not endorse it. That is the purview of the mayor. Mr. Honeman?
Just some quick questions to the administration. To clarify, it's not known as the United Way campaign. It's actually called the Municipal Employee Fundraising Campaign, correct? My question to you is do you know from your knowledge and experience how long has the MEFC been in existence for the municipality, for its employees to contribute to charitable organizations and their payroll? My understanding was since like 1950s or early 1950s. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Herman, I don't know when the MEFC or the Municipal Employees Fundraising Campaign was initially put into place. We have had a policy since the Maestrom administration that dictates how that program is run.
And in that policy or in the way that's been run functionally, have all or do all charitable organizations in Anchorage, Alaska get access to the employees for charitable giving on the MEFC forms? All. I'm talking every nonprofit charitable organization.
No, sir.
Okay. So we already exclude some. Who gets to make that decision?
The policy is based on participation of umbrella organizations, and those organizations that qualify under those umbrella groups are included, and employees may select from those groups. There are criteria for the qualifications of the organizations that can participate. Right now, there are 2 umbrella groups that participate, one or has in the past, United Way and Alaska Community Share.
And one more quick questions on the point. Stuff the Bus program, is that a program that's operated by municipal employees?
I'm not familiar with it. My understanding is yes, that it has been.
Canned goods for the food bank?
It's similar.
And use the people mover bus to drive to. Dollars for Dogs program?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Honeman.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Before I bring up the voting, it was interesting. I had a meeting today at 2 o'clock with Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Michaelis, representative of United Way, and the mayor. And I thought that policy, the mayor directed that policy be sent to the clerk's office. Remember when we left that meeting? He said to take draft off it and send it to the clerk's office. Why wasn't that done?
Mr. Chairman, I do not recall that he said remove it and send it.
I would check with him then, Mr. Wheeler, because I remember him saying that clearly, that if you need to modify it later on, that can be done. But he said he wanted that to go immediately to the clerk's office. You might check with him when he gets here.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Please vote. Item is approved 6-5. Next item in front of us is item 9C1, Send Memorandum AM 454-2010, Recommendation Award to Pruge Construction. That was pulled by Mr. Starr. Mr. Starr, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
Go ahead.
Mr. Starr.
Yeah, as I indicated when we approved, as this body, we approved the 40th Street upgrade plan. This is the contract letting that work to begin. I have a development company that is working on a project that overlaps with this one, and I have a conflict of interest.
You said you're working on this one?
Absolutely. The project that I'm working on abuts with this one, and there'll be work that'll be interlinked.
The chair directs you to have a conflict of interest on this, sir.
Thank you.
Do not participate. Is there any objection to approval of this item by the body that can vote on, members that can vote on this? Seeing no objection, that item is approved, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Starr, for bringing that forward to the body. Next item in front of us is item 9D8, Same Memorandum AM 452, 2010, change order number 1 to purchase order 2010-4096 with Emerald Alaska for the municipality of Anchorage Municipal Light and Power, $175,770.05. That was pulled by you, Paul.
I'll move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Paul, go ahead.
For purpose of discussion, I know this is something that I think Mr. Starr, possibly maybe Ms. Osander, had mentioned in a previous meeting or so, and this is having to do with contaminated soils. And I noted that this one, of course, came in on the addendum, so I wasn't enough time to get the request through the administration and with notice. It appears that the initial assessment, of course, reading through the document, is that it was about 100 tons, and since then the task has gone for over 46 days and 723 tons. And I noticed that it looks like there's some upper limit money that allows for extra, perhaps removal if necessary. Does the administration, I don't know who to address this to, ML&P, Mr. Posey, whoever, do you think that this is going to be sufficient to clean up the properties, both time and monies?
Good evening. I'm Rick Miller, CFO, Assistant GM for Municipal Light and Power. Mr. Honeman, through the chair, for this project, this will be significant. It will cover it. But anytime we're doing work down at Plant 1 and digging in the dirt, we're probably going to find contaminated soils. So in the future, if we do additional work down there, there could be additional contaminated soils in that area.
And I can appreciate that. I understand the plant's been around a while, and there's been some previous technologies and certainly materials that were used into that. I know this was a discussion that we had, again, openly in previous meetings. Is there any other future work anticipated near that area that could, I mean, these are things that are unknown. We don't know exactly. You give estimates, and certainly it comes in with and we were just talking about having some budget concerns upcoming.
This project deals with actually putting in what's called a black start generator to replace the two basically World War II vintage generators that went in back in the early 50s. And that is, if the whole plant goes dark, we need power to get the rotors to turn on those turbines to be able to start them back up. So this is a very important project. The next important project, though, will be a new LM2500 plus generator down at that plant in the next 2 to 3 years. And at that time, we'll be back probably digging in the dirt, and we'll probably find more contaminated soils like we did when we put in the first LM2500 plus.
The request, then, I guess, just a quick question to you. Thanks for accommodating. Is there any chance of being able to use any of the funds up to the $250,000? Let's just say you've already got, or a majority, if not all, of the cleanup here, to perhaps use some of that money for mitigation. Would that be a proper? I don't know if you'd have to come back through for a request to use those funds for, like, helping to mitigate in advance. So I'm talking about pre-planning so that we can get a better estimate rather than coming in 2 years from now and saying, well, we think it's 100 tons, and now we come up to 700, 800 tons. Any way of knowing?
Until you actually start digging and knowing how much dirt you have to remove, I don't know if there is a way to know. The contamination happened during the earthquake, and there was, I believe, at least one fuel tank that was ruptured. And there's been other things that probably leached into the soil, too, not just that one tank.
Thank you.
There doesn't appear to be any. Thank you, sir. Ask unanimous consent. Is there any objection? Seeing none. That was approved, Madam Clerk. That completes all the items that I had.
Sir.
They were pulled for further discussion.
E3.
Which one?
Echo 3. 9 Echo 3.
9 what?
Echo 3, E3.
Okay, sorry. 9 Echo 3.
There's a move to accept.
Second.
Go ahead.
I pulled this really for one purpose only, and actually two. The statement on the cover of this from the administration speaks to further reports as it relates to revenue summary, and I wanted everyone to make note of that because that's an active project that we're working on. We're seeing a challenge in combining the revenue summaries in with this report, and that's been a goal of mine and the committee's, I think, to kind of flesh out something that's readable. We got a presentation on revenues and the summaries therein, and it's, again, 1,100 revenue accounts and 20 pages long. It's not going to be such a good, efficient document for this body to review. So make note of this comment in that the administration is working hard. Cheryl Fresk, in particular, and Lucinda Mahoney are just awesome with the forthcoming nature of trying to get us something that we can use to manage the store. Expenses is half the equation, revenues is the next. So within probably the next couple of weeks, I would suspect you'll see a draft of the revenue statements that will make some readable and useful sense for us. I will note that we don't get good revenue information until usually about May. We got June's report at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We'll talk more about it perhaps Thursday if there's time. So not to take too much more of that, but look for some revenue summaries to occur as well.
Thank you, Mr.
I did have a
Starr.
specific question as it relates to the report and I asked Diane Ingalls to stay just a moment. You've got, Ms. Ingalls, about a $24,000-$25,000 travel budget, and you seem to not be using it. I'm wondering if you're going to, and did you make some changes in your directions?
Thank you, through the chair, Mr. Starr. We have curtailed travel this year in order to make sure that we have sufficient money overall to balance the budget at the end of the year and to reevaluate priorities this year with the revenue and the city's overall revenue picture. So while we would like to spend more travel potentially, we are looking at everything with greater scrutiny. And while we think there's a lot of opportunities that our staff could take advantage of that would be helpful in the running of the department, we want to be the best and prudent managers of the funds. And revenue has not always been as high as we'd like. And overall, every year that I've been director, I've delivered a balanced budget, and this year will be no exception. So that's a place that we've been holding back.
Good. Well, I read the reports and I appreciate the effort. I'm sure that's not easy to do. You've had pre-approved requests and you've said no to them. So thank you for that. It's $1,200 thereabouts of a $25,000 budget you've expended, and that's quite a feat. So thank you for doing that. That's all.
I'm sorry, I just noticed this. On the report on the page that's entitled 2010 Budget to Actual by Department, on the bottom it lists what's called supplementals. And it includes the Hanson Project, something called Eagle River Bond Debt Service. Can you explain what supplementals are?
Yes, through the chair. The supplementals represent changes that have been made to the expenditure budget since the first quarter budget revision was improved. So, for example, the Eagle River Bond Debt Service amount of $76,310, that was a resolution that was passed in January of 2010, where we presented to you the situation where we should repay some of the debt associated with Eagle River Parks and Rec because it was bond money.
I remember now. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members will return to their seats, please. We'll get started. We're now on item 13A, continued public hearing. Public hearing this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward, state your name clearly for the record, and spell your last name, please. It helps, according to the clerk. Don't be shy. We're going to keep this meeting going for a while, but if you're not here, I will end the meeting. So come up and testify. And I've been known to do it. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is O.C. Madden. I am Director of Operations for Brown Jug, and I'm here tonight to urge your support for removing the restriction on our conditional use permit. Initially, when this came forward, it was that I think the purpose was to prevent public inebriates from obtaining alcohol. And the thought behind it is that a lot of public inebriates don't have ID, and therefore 100% restriction would prevent inebriates from obtaining alcohol. Our store's almost 3/4 of a mile back into a shopping center around a long road, and the public inebriate would have to walk past several other liquor stores in order to even get there. So, quite frankly, it just really is not there's no point to require it from that standpoint. Another issue that came up was the red stripe ID. But this is the only store in Anchorage and the only license in Anchorage where there's a 100% carding restriction. And so it's not an effective means to prevent red stripe offenders from obtaining alcohol because it's the only store located in a shopping district a long ways from most of the city. And so it's not an effective way to keep red stripe offenders from obtaining alcohol. And then the thought was that, 100% restriction would prevent minors from obtaining alcohol. And quite frankly, what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of upset customers that are 50, 60, 70 years old that have been carded 50 or 60 times. And carding a 70-year-old man 50 times in a row does not prevent a minor from obtaining alcohol. It just doesn't. What it does is it offends a customer and they leave us and they go to another business, a competitor. Brown Jug, in dealing with underage drinking, I mean, we've been recognized nationally on a number of occasions for our efforts to prevent underage drinking. Our policy right now is to card 30 and under. We run in-house tests to test our employees. Since 2002, we've run over 6,000 in-house tests. Our policy is to immediately terminate any employee who fails to request ID from one of our in-house shoppers. We pay significant bonuses to our employees for catching minors in the store. Employee that catches a minor in the store is entitled to a bonus of up to $270. And then if they pass an ABC compliance test, we pay a bonus of $250 on top of that. So we pay significant, since we've initiated this program, we've paid tens of thousands of dollars in bonuses to our employees for catching minors. I don't know of any other retailer in town that has a program like that. We were also selected to be the National Distinguished Retailer of the Year by the Responsible Retailing Forum of America. They were looking for a model retailer to use to replicate throughout the United States. We were chosen as the Distinguished Retailer of the Year. Sometime back, we led the charge on the voluntary program, and unfortunately that fell apart. It did not fall apart due to our efforts. We continued even after several of our competitors had dropped out of the voluntary program. And we tested our employees to ensure compliance during that period of time that it was in effect. When we realized it was not going to be honored by our competitors, we requested to withdraw and were allowed to do so. One of my concerns with the 100% restriction is the civil liability that our company faces as a result of this. Because there's a mandate on this store to card 100% of the customers, we face the same liability issues as we would with any customer who walks in the door, regardless of their age or the level of sobriety. And some potential significant civil liability issues could come about as a result of an accident or harm that results through some sale of alcohol to a perfectly sober, legal person that we serve that's of age. And I'm concerned because we're the only license in town where that civil liability exists. During the last hearing, there was a comment made by one of the Northeast Community Council members that DUI offenders are a valuable brown jug market. And I found that statement to be offensive and insulting. We've done nothing but worked very, very hard over the years to prevent the sale of alcohol that causes harm in this community. And, our employees routinely report drunk drivers to the police. A comment was also made that Walmart universally cards. Walmart had a 100% carding restriction on their conditional use permit, but they requested it be removed, and this body did just that. And we're asking the same thing, be placed on a level playing field with our competitors. One of the comments that I had, and I believe that Bob Klein will speak to this later, is about kegs. That we sell kegs. Kegs are registered in Anchorage. I'm not sure if all of you are aware of that or not, but to buy a keg, you have to go through a very difficult process. Kegs are also tagged
They have to maintain the tag. Possession of an untagged keg in Anchorage is a crime. The person's got a sign for the keg. They go through quite a process to do that. So, just in conclusion, I would urge that you please remove this restriction from our license. We would like to see a ballot initiative come forward next year and allow everyone to have an opportunity to speak on this, be educated on it, move forward, and vote on it. I'm going to be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. I do have a few people. Got a quick question for you. On page 1, line 21 through 23, you state, whereas Anchorage Assembly has not amended municipal code to add this same requirement as a standard requirement of alcohol beverage conditional use approval at other locations. Would you support it if we did, in fact, require it mandatory for every alcohol licensed location so it was an even playing field?
What I would like to see is, I think the civil liability issues are a very real concern for us. And I think what I'd like to see is an opportunity for the public to vote on it, and give us an opportunity at a state level to try to craft some protections for our industry. My understanding from talking to council is that the municipality cannot write a law that ties a state court in a civil liability issue. We've already met with one legislator. We were looking at meeting with several others to try to work towards crafting some protections for our industry, and then move forward to a point where we can allow everyone to vote on this matter and let everyone have a say in it. It's kind of like federal radar. You know, it's something that the public overall, they really, really oppose. And I think it's important that everybody have an opportunity to vote on it.
I do remember photo radar. Mr. Gutierrez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I had a couple of questions, but you raised an interesting point. When we went through this before and ended up with a voluntary program, the ordinance that was before the Assembly was written in such a way as to exempt you from liability for someone's actions down the road after they left the store. If you had made every good faith effort to try to catch that red stripe ID, if they used a fake ID, if they somehow managed to sneak by because accidents happen, the liability was completely, or culpability was completely on the person who broke the law by walking through your door in the first place. I'm curious how you feel a ballot initiative would alleviate that civil liability differently, and it was your feeling that, and forgive me if I'm wrong, if I'm misstating, but it was your feeling at the time that what we had written didn't actually protect you from that civil liability. How would a ballot initiative do so? Wouldn't you still have that civil liability?
I think there's two steps to this. I think the first step is that we need to work with state legislators on a state level to craft some protections for our industry. Right now, under the law, civil liability attaches if you make a sale of alcohol to an intoxicated person or underage person with criminal negligence. So I think that we need to look. There's, with the ballot, if it were to be enacted tonight, citywide, conceivably any sale of alcohol could result in civil liability to the industry. If someone that's harmed could manage to get the person who purchased the alcohol, even though they were legal and of age and had a perfectly valid ID, to say, you know what, in that one sale I didn't get carded.
Right.
Then any harm that's resulted could potentially tie back into licensee. There's a couple of different scenarios that could roll and have a devastating effect on the licensee. As a matter of fact, South Carolina, last month, there was the Supreme Court ruled that a $10 million judgment against a liquor store could stand. And so there's that possibility out there. We'd like to work with the state to craft some protections moving towards the ballot initiative and let everybody have a say on it.
In that South Carolina case, were they under a 100% ID restriction?
No, it was one or the other. I'm not sure how the case moved forward. I just saw the...
So that civil liability is currently faced by you now under the status quo?
But only on sales of alcohol to underage people or drunken persons. This would make it any single person that walks in the door.
Okay. You mentioned your program for rewarding employees who catch somebody underage, catch a fake ID, that sort of thing. You and I had talked about the red stripe IDs, and you do catch several of them in the course of a year. And I believe you mentioned you have a rewards program for that as well.
We do. If we're successful in collecting in civil action, it's hard to do against the red stripe people because they don't have a lot of assets and they tend to be extremely irresponsible people. They're pretty hard to tie down.
Okay.
But
we would pay up to $270. We pay an immediate bonus of $20 for catching red stripe ID.
I tend to disagree with you on the civil liability issue, and you know, that's something for the lawyers to hash out. But very clearly, and I think I communicated to you, and I hope that you heard it and believed it, that it was never our intent to try to place the blame on the industry for selling to somebody. If somebody snuck in, it's kind of like, Mr. Chairman, I think you can appreciate this. I think there's ridiculous efforts to sue gun makers. When somebody walks into a liquor store and shoots the clerk, you sue the guy who made the gun. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's not your fault. It's the fault of the person who broke the law by walking into your store in the first place. We'll have to find a way to hash that out.
The gun maker still has to come up with a lot of money to defend themselves in those situations.
I know.
Helps.
One of the other things that we heard at the last public hearing from the Community Council were assurances from Brown Jug about the types of things that would be sold, the types of products that would be sold at the store, and that they would be mainly high-end, not any of the real cheap stuff. And it was their feeling, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my recollection that it was their feeling that that's not exactly what's going on, that what they were promised is not what has come to fruition. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, I think one of the comments that was on the public, and Bob Klein is going to speak to our product mix issues. He's our director of marketing, and I think he's better qualified to speak on the overall product mix in the store. But one of the issues that came up at the last hearing was the keg issue, and I don't, you know, to buy a keg, first you have to go through the registration process. You got to come up with $150, $160 for the keg, and then you got to come up with almost another $100 for the deposit, and you've got to carry this 150-pound keg out of the store. And it's not something homeless people are carrying off in the woods. It's not a low-ring item. It's not a low-ring item. And we do have an upgraded product selection there from most of the stores in Anchorage. Have you been in the store? I have. Okay. I also sent pictures to everybody to help give everybody an idea of what it looks like. It is a very nice store. It's probably the nicest store in the state. And we do have a higher-end selection there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you. Harriet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Madden, for coming. You are not the only store in Anchorage that has a 100% ID check requirement. I don't know the conditions of their permit, but Spirits of Alaska on Gamble Street, where my son has worked for the last year and a half, has a 100% ID check policy. I think it was requested and agreed to by the Community Council. And we actually did shop in your store last week, and we found it very pleasant. But he said that there are certain brands that the store in Fairview is not supposed to carry that are being sold in your store, certain cheap vodkas, things like that. And he complained because the Community Council apparently put these restrictions on the store several years ago and hasn't really followed up on how that's being implemented. However, he always thought that the 100% ID check requirement worked real well for the kind of clientele that he has to deal with in that neighborhood, and it makes it easier.
Is that
to
a
reduce
policy?
Service.
Is that a policy of the company, or is that a conditional use permit?
I'm not certain what the permit itself says.
That was a conditional use permit. Ellen Teshy was on the body with me when we did that, ma'am.
Yeah, but it's a 100% ID check at Spirits of Alaska.
Anything else, Harriet?
No, that's it.
Mr. Starr, sir?
Mr. Madden, the dialogue back when we approved your conditional use had a sort of an agreement that the industry was going to be sort of a cooperative signer to the 100% citywide agreement, and that subsequently broke down after your conditional use was approved. But I heard it was successful. Everyone signed on and everything was great. We thought we got them all, and then it broke down. What's your opinion on why it broke down? Why did people just want to be out or get out?
Quite frankly, I think a couple of our major competitors face such significant levels of complaints from their customer base that their corporate headquarters outside required them to renege on the agreement. And that really is where it broke down at.
When you first approached me on the topic, you sent me probably 10 or 12 emails or forwards. I think they were blanked, but I could see that they were from your customers.
Right.
You obviously get them. That's kind of
Yes.
why we're here talking about this. So
Yeah, they're very, a lot of people are very upset, and it's not the people that, it's not the red stripe people that are complaining. It's not the drunks that are complaining. These folks own businesses in this town. They're upstanding, responsible citizens. And, what we're seeing right now is some people that were okay with it the first time they get carded, maybe the 10th time they get carded. Now it's the 50th, the 60th, the 70th time they're getting carded. It's like, come on. And basically what we're saying is that if you want to make a purchase from me, you have to prove first that you're not a criminal. Otherwise, I can't deal with you. And that's not a good way to deal with customers. That's not a, our policies and practices that we have in place throughout our chain, throughout the municipality of Anchorage and in Wasilla are very good at turning away the problem people.
I cased out the place. I didn't necessarily shop, but there's security, quite a few of them roaming around there. The IMAX movie theater is now open and all that, but I saw probably 3 or 4 various types of rigs there. Whose security is that?
Well, I think the landlord, the Cottonu Commons landlord there, has the security for the parking area. But additionally, Brown Jug, we have our own patrol security officer. He's got over 7 years' experience in the security industry, and he's a very bright young man. We've provided him with all the tools he needs: a car, cell phone, laptop, everything that he needs to do his job. And he's available to respond to problems at any of our stores, including the Cottonu Commons.
And he roams that store too?
He does, all of our stores.
Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sir, thank you. There are no other questions in front of you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Anybody else wishing to testify, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Carla Hadley, and I felt so strongly about this. I was on a business trip, cut it short, hopped on a plane from Kodiak and came straight here, hence the crazy outfit. I am a member of the Muldoon community. I also attend community council meetings. Back at this time when Brown Jug representatives came to talk to us about Cottonu, we brought up several suggestions. We actually, the Muldoon community is very, we have a lot of carry-out liquor stores. We have a lot of places that sell liquor. They knew that we were not for this. And we brought up several things, such as you have another Brown Jug store less than a mile away from that one, which is on Muldoon Road. We also talked about location. One of the first things you do in a business is evaluate your location. Well, that location is convenient to military, who can buy on post cheaper, Bartlett High School students who don't buy liquor, hopefully, and mall workers who probably won't sustain the store. It's really not that convenient for anyone else. So to say that there's an issue with business being impacted by this sorry, I'm very nervous, by what we've asked them for, is kind of silly. I think they broke the first rule in business, which is location, location, location. But the fact is they came in and talked to us, we had a good conversation, and we had a compromise. We had a good compromise, and it's one that they agreed to be a part of our community, which they already are, because they are on Muldoon Road already. But it was a good compromise. It's what we asked for, and it's what they agreed to. And the fact is how good is their word? How good is their word if they will tell us anything we want to hear so that they can get their store into our neighborhood and then run to an assembly member who doesn't attend any community council meetings in our area and doesn't talk to us and say, it's unfair. How can they do that to us? Why us? Poor us. It's what they told us they would do. It was their word. And if their word isn't good for us, it isn't good for anybody. That's all we ask. And I can't imagine that any community member or person that goes there, if they were explained, if they had the explanation of why they do it, would really think that was a horrible thing. Is it really a horrible thing to ask people for ID? You do it when you go to a doctor. They take your ID anytime like that. It's not a horrible thing. It might save a life. It might not. Is saving a life worth a $10 million lawsuit that they think they're going to get hit with? I don't know. That's up to you guys to decide, you ladies and gentlemen. So that's all I wanted to say. I just want them to keep their word to us as a community. Thanks.
Questions from assembly members? Ma'am, did you attend the community council when this item came up originally?
Yes, I did.
Was there a time constraint put on this restriction on their license? For example, we'll have it expire in 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year?
The community asked for it. I know we did a resolution. I did not review those particular minutes. I know we asked for it and they agreed to it. I cannot remember if we asked for it for a certain amount of time.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else wishing to testify, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly, my name is Bob Klein. I'm with Brown Jug. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing. I'd like to address first the comment that was just made by this young lady. It was I who made the presentation to the Community Council, Northeast Community Council. Just before the vote, I was asked by Stu Grenier, who was here at the last meeting, you'll recall, would we do a 100% ID check if they approved our license? And my answer to him was no. I don't know where they got the information that we agreed to it. The specific question was, would we do it? My answer was no. I'd like to address a couple of things. First, the military was brought up. Our proximity to the military. I'd like you to know that gate that comes right out to Tecotney Center closes at 6 o'clock every evening. It's open strictly for commuting. It's not a way for military people to come and go next to our store. The other thing is, OC mentioned keggers. Average price of a kegger is about $120. You know, they come in various sizes. OC described what you have to go through to buy a keg. And so to use that as a reason that we have violated our trust, it just escapes me. The other is the reference to the Fairview restrictions. I was with Oaken Kegs and actually running the Oaken Kegs at the time that those Fairview restrictions were put in. They were geared to a terrible street problem that was occurring in the Fairview area. Oaken Keg and the other stores in the area were asked to, and Ruth Moulton, you will remember, helped negotiate this, and we just decided to agree that we would not carry very inexpensive items. When you come to Tecotney Center and you see this gorgeous store we put, when you look at the fact that we have over 2,500 wines, we have about 1,700 spirits, we have about 1,200 beers, to say that, oh my goodness, look at them, they're carrying inexpensive booze is ridiculous when you take it against what it is that the customers see. What this comes down to really is a marketing problem that you guys have created. Tecotney is not a neighborhood store, it's a destination. Doesn't serve a neighborhood, it serves the city. We depend on people to visit our store and to have that kind of experience so the next time they come to that destination, they will again come to our store. And I have personally been called an idiot by more gray-haired people in the last couple of months than in my entire life. They don't understand why, out of all the places in Anchorage, this one store, they have to produce their ID. You tell a young lady, or not so young lady, that she's got to go back to her car in the rain and get her license before we make the sale, you have lost the customer. It is a marketing issue, and it's one that coming into this season, coming into the holiday season, we would rather not be the only store in Anchorage that has this restriction. So we're asking you please to remove it.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Ms. Osiander?
Mr. Klein, had you ever attended a Northeast Community Council before this one that you went to?
I've attended 3.
Then I'm sure you're aware that they have a growing concern about street people and chronic inebriates in that neighborhood, are you not?
Yes, very much so.
And in fact, that's the main impetus, not necessarily underage drinkers. They've come to us several times and talked to us about the alcohol bottles that they see in the street, the people who hang out and just basically live in the campgrounds there, who have a lot of evidence of using alcohol around their campsites. That certainly played with the Assembly when your ordinance, when this particular conditional use came before us. And I do recall discussions about, from your organization, that this was not going to, you weren't going to be serving that clientele, you were going to be a higher-end store. Do you sell single-serving alcohol drinks?
Yes, we do.
Why?
Because our customers, some customers would like it.
But isn't it true that that's also the drink that's most appealing to chronic inebriates and street people?
Single serve, as in...
It isn't? I'm seeing some...
Well, it's...
What is, then? What drinks are most appealing?
Everything from mouthwash to inexpensive vodka to the kind of serves that you're talking about to 40-ounce beer. There's no one alcohol of choice for the street inebriate, but the issue is for us in that particular location, it is probably in all of the city the least likely location to be people by or attempted to purchase by street inebriates.
I just want to suggest to you, sir, that particularly in this neighborhood, with this community council, who have repeatedly said that they have concerns about street people and chronic inebriates, it might be good policy for your store to try to limit the selection of stuff that you sell. And if you don't want to do it in the Takotna Commons, then potentially in your other store in the Muldoon area. I think it would really, I'm just giving you friendly advice here. It would help a lot in a problem that I think has been recognized repeatedly by the Community Council and repeatedly recognized by this Assembly.
So, Seander, I appreciate what you're saying. You know, the issue before us today is the Takotna store, and it is the least, again, in order to get to us, a street inebriate would have to cross 6 lanes of traffic, go through a half a mile of security and parking lot.
No, sir,
we don't see them at that store.
I know where your store is. I'm trying to give you constructive feedback that I think will help you with public relations.
And I appreciate that.
And if you would just make a statement either here or to the community council meeting about your intent to somehow limit the products that you serve in a neighborhood that has repeatedly made complaints, it would help you a lot. And I'm not hearing that back yet. I'm hoping I hear it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Honeman has a question for you.
Quick question. Comment, actually. I'm from the public safety background, I guess you'd say, and alcohol is, there's no doubt that alcohol plays a percentage of criminal activity, and not the least of which is potentially, as you say, it's not necessarily residences, people walking to and from that store. So they're going to be driving, and already Mr. Madden had testified how Brown Jug has a solid policy, and I'll say for the record, I think Brown Jug has been probably the standard bearer, and I think Mr. Madden had also testified. I'll say that I think Brown Jug, and I've said it many times publicly and to many people, that Brown Jug does a really good job being responsible, and I've always used you as a standard bearer in the community as to responsible retailers and the many good deeds you do in the community, particularly in the area cleaning up the homeless camps that up until this recent issues have been very helpful to this community, and I thank you for that. And I'll borrow. My concern is this. We've got a state statute. It's a law, and it's not much different than you can't rob somebody, you can't sexually assault somebody, you can't break into somebody's house and take things. There's a state law that says if you've got a problem with conviction of an alcohol offense as a felony, you get a red stripe on your license. Who is going to enforce that law better than the person selling the beverage, the alcohol beverages to the patrons? I mean, do you expect that there'd be a police officer or someone from the government, if you will, to stand in your store and to watch the people coming in and out, and if you will, this is something that's very easily explained, that you're being a good civic community partner, which I believe is in your advertising, that you're community-minded, and you'd be a good civic partner to do your part to help, if you will, make our community safer and not sell to those people who are prohibited. And I ask is there any other suggestion or recommendation that we can reach this standpoint to make sure that the people who are prohibited are not making those purchases?
Mr. Horniman, through the chair, there are about 1,000 of these licenses that have been issued so far. I think in all of our stores, in 20 stores, we have found about a half a dozen, if that. The sad thing is that once you are issued this license, there's nothing to prevent you from using your passport or other means of identification. If you're affluent enough, you can pick up a state ID when you're traveling into Seattle. So this is just not the answer to inconvenience. As O.C. said, 2 million tourists, 600,000 citizens, just to find this one who might not think to use his passport. It just makes no sense. And as one who's responsible for marketing and one who's responsible for commerce, the way we look at it is we are gatekeepers. We want to make sure that the individual before us is sober, the individual before us is of age. Then, as any retailer, we want to kill him with kindness. Well, you've imposed now something extra. The fact that this person is of age, the person is sober, we still make them go back to their car and get a driver's license. For what? That's what we're asking. Why this store? Why this single conditional use? And coming into the holiday season, it's something that really grates against those of us who are in commerce.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Ike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Klein, you raised an interesting point. You mentioned passport as a way to get around this. One of the interesting things happened is Mr. Madden had asked me if I'd shopped in that store, and I had. And I learned a few things from the clerk there, who was exceptionally knowledgeable. There was another patron who objected to being carded and said something snarky to the clerk. Well, I just used my passport or my military ID or my passport or something to get around it. And the clerk said, yes, you could, but that's why we have this. And the clerk pulled out a lovely yellow sheet that if you use one of those non-driver's license IDs, I fill this out, put your information on it, goes to the court system, and if you have a restricted ID, guess what? You're busted. Is that still practice? Because if it is, then the idea of using a non-standard ID to get around this seems to be a red herring.
Not in every case that a passport is presented. Remember, we have an environment here where we're going to get literally hundreds of thousands of tourists, many from outside, millions of tourists. And so a passport is a valid ID. We use the yellow form where we have some question as to whether or not the person is giving us an ID.
Okay.
And yes, it is a record, but it's not used in every case.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Klein, before you leave, there are no other questions. Just want to go over one other point. You said when you started your testimony that your company did not agree to 100% ID check there. Was that correct?
At the Northeast Community Council, when we came to ask their support, because the license, as you know, license transfers goes to Community Council, we were there to present our case and to ask for their support. As it turned out, the vote was, I believe, 10 in favor, 11 against. But just before the vote, I had been asked the question, if we approve this, will you agree to 100% ID check? And the reason I said no is I didn't see where it would solve anything.
Okay. When it came in front of the Assembly, were you asked the question on 100% ID check here?
No, we were not. If you recall, I'm not sure who
I'm not sure if I was on at that time.
I don't think you were, but what happened was there was a lot of discussion. Discussion ended, and after discussion ended, somebody brought up and attached to the conditional use 100% ID. We were never asked our opinion on it. It was attached after public testimony was closed.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Any other?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Anybody else wish to testify, please come forward. Anyone at all? Hearing saying no, and the public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go ahead.
As I had mentioned to you earlier,
Okay.
When we continued this public hearing
Yep.
at the last meeting, we sort of did so on the fly. And typically, when we do that, we let people know ahead of time.
Now, do you have a question you want to ask?
I am asking, there is a representative from the community council
Would it help you
here.
make a decision?
I'm sorry?
Would it help you make a decision?
I don't know if it'll help me make a decision, but it might help other members of the body make a decision.
That's fine, then ask your question to the individual.
Well,
Go ahead, Mike.
I would just like to ask the chair of the community council, Kevin Smestad, to come forward if he would. If it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, he did testify last time, but
I'm just trying to get you there.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Kevin, you offered us some testimony last time before we continued the public hearing, and we sort of cut things off. I wanted to give you a chance to ask if there was anything you wanted to add from your previous testimony that might be of value to the body.
I would like to add, in the meantime, afterwards, I did go down and meet with OC and CHAR and speak with them. And even after that meeting, I still feel strongly for this required ID check. This, I believe, will extremely help our area. It will bring about a way of checking to make sure that everyone is in compliance. I've heard that this is a destination store. If it's a destination store, people are not normally walking there. They're driving. If you're driving and you're driving without your driver's license, there's other stuff that could happen to you beyond, the liquor. So and me personally, I've walked into many locations and had my ID checked, and it does not bother me one bit. But I would like to state that I have heard from people on the other side that want us to card. They want us to do this. And I'm not talking about younger people. I'm talking about people that are older. They've asked for it, that people that live in our area, and they've asked me to come down and to bring this up again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all.
Debbie, you have questions, Debbie? Comments? Go ahead, ma'am.
I'm going to be supporting this basically because of equity. However, I do want to make some comments. There are many stores still that are voluntarily doing this. I don't think it's fair that this is the only one with a conditional use permit. But I do want to add that I have a real recognition that Muldoon and that part of Anchorage has a growing concern with chronic inebriates. I know that Mr. Flynn has added conditional language on the permits that come in his community council area that specifically restrict certain types of materials being sold in the store, such as the single drink servings. From now on, I'm going to try to add those to liquor license that come to me from in that geographic area. I've got to somehow legitimize and recognize what I think is a legitimate community concern from Northeast Anchorage. I really regret that Brown Jug is not voluntarily making a statement like that. I certainly applaud Mr. O'Neill and his long history of work with dealing with our chronic inebriates. But personally, I'm a little frustrated with your organization right now for not making a volunteer statement to help with basically a community concern. I voted for this thing initially because I thought that there was going to be rapidly an ordinance coming that would require this for everybody. And since we can't do it, or we haven't done it, it isn't fair that you have it. But I want to urge you strongly to recognize that this is not a part of town that should be ignored. More and more high-density housing is going in the Muldoon area. There's more and more of a problem with chronic inebriates camping out on the streets. And you guys need to be partners in this as historically you've been in the past. Please, please consider your product selection. I know where I'm heading in the future. I hope you join me there. Thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez, sir, on the motion in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one of those rare and very happy moments when Ms. Osiander and I are almost in complete lockstep. I do intend to support or rather, I'm going to vote no on the issue in front of it.
Move the two of you if this happens too often.
I don't think we have to. Do we have to worry about? I don't think we have to worry about that, but it's okay. I appreciate a lot of what she had to say, particularly with regard to, I think, making a plea to Brown Jug to consider the community's wishes. This particular requirement, and the characterization was right. This came about after the public testimony was done. It was an amendment that I proposed because of what I heard from the community. This was the bare minimum compromise that the community wanted, the bare minimum that they asked for. So we gave it to them. 8 members of this body voted yes. I'm not sure when the last time 8 members of this body agreed on much, but we did. We recognized, and several people spoke during that particular debate about the fact that, yeah, probably not fair that it's just Brown Jug, just at Tecotneu Commons, and so I brought forward an ordinance. You didn't want that. You didn't like it. It didn't go anywhere. We came up with a voluntary program, which has been rightfully stated. You guys did all the work to put together. I have absolutely nothing bad to say about that. Ed, you did a lot of legwork on that, and I appreciate it. And it's not your fault that it fell apart. Nonetheless, it did. I think that it's worth looking at in the future, regardless of what happens here tonight, of 2 possibilities. I think one is to move forward, and what I would intend to do and support Ms. Osiander on is adding certain restrictions to all the licenses as they come up. And as a matter of fact, more than half of the licenses in this particular community council area are up at the end of this year. So we will have a chance to make a big impact. You won't be the only ones. I can promise you that. You're not the only ones now, as you heard from Ms. Drummond. You won't be the only ones by the end of the year either. So, Mr. Chairman, one other point that I wanted to bring up very quickly. We talked about the competitive issue, which I hear. I understand that. Your business, like any other. You're not the only ones with this restriction. There are others who are still doing it voluntarily. They don't feel the competitive pinch, apparently. Maybe your customers are different. Maybe your customers are less inclined to want to show an ID than the average person who walks into another store that's still doing it voluntarily. I do, however, as I go around town and in different parts of the city go out to eat, there are a lot of restaurants that do this voluntarily. They are under no restriction by the municipality or by the state of Alaska to card people 100%, but walk into Lone Star Steakhouse and you see a giant sign out front, "We ID everyone." They're not feeling a competitive pinch. The place is always packed. They're doing good business. Fortunately, it's one of my favorite spots. But so I'm not sure that this competitive issue really is a valid one. I hear it, and if it were, I'd be concerned because I want you to succeed and I want you to do well. But I'm not sure that it really is a valid concern in this case. For all of those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be voting no on this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Honeman? Just to follow on with what Mike said, I fully intend to also start pushing towards conditions, the equal conditions, 100% ID check, and the basis of that is to assist in the enforcement of the state law and the red stripe law. And so you won't be, I can almost guarantee you, with what Mike says. I've long held your particular distributorship as the standard bearer, and I've said it earlier to you, and I'll say it on the record, that I'm disappointed that, here's a chance for you to be community-minded and to be a good neighbor and carry out your civic responsibility in a voluntary basis. Granted, there's a condition here that requires it, but I'm voting against the removal of it. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my part of town has the most fascinating history with the alcohol industry of any part of Anchorage. And it goes on. Mr. Horn and I were discussing it just the other day. And what happened in the downtown area in particular back in the 80s is basically every package store was eradicated in an effort to address some of the issues associated with public inebriation. And the one that remained was, I believe, within the lobby of a local hotel. And then that lease came up and it was time to move out. And so the operator, which was then, as now, Brown Jug, worked out a deal with one of my predecessors, Charles Wolfworth. And there was quite a list, frankly, of restrictions on that package store, which is now on Fifth Avenue. Since then, we've had, I believe, 2 additional outlets open downtown. We've imposed the same restrictions on them that we have on the downtown wine and spirit store, Brown Jug outlet, and it's worked pretty well. So what we have before us tonight is something similar, except the equity issue that Ms. Osiander raises is a reasonable one, a factual one. How do you pick who goes first? It was easy downtown. They were the first ones because everybody else had been kicked out. Not so easy on the east side. What I would suggest, and we can't do this tonight, but what I would suggest is that this assembly consider an ordinance that requires a 100% ID check, if that's the desire of the Northeast Community Council, for all stores within their community council boundaries. And we set an effective date delayed for a year or 2, and that allows us to impose that conditional use restriction on each and every store as their renewal comes up. And if there are, in fact, liability concerns that we can't address as a municipal body that need to go to before the state legislature for consideration, then there's time for that to occur. I'm willing to vote for this tonight simply to allow that process to work forward in an equitable manner. But I do think that the community council has raised some legitimate issues, and I do think those should be pursued. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Starr, sir.
Well, I think there's been a lot of good debate, and I think that's what this body needs to do best. And when we debate the issues from the perspectives of our constituents, we do good work. What we did to this retailer wasn't good work because it wasn't equitable and fair. It was, I believe, discriminatory. It wasn't a store that had a track record of history. It wasn't a vendor that had a track record of history. In fact, it's quite the opposite with their civic responsibilities, public, and their initiatives towards the homeless camp cleanups and the responsible retailing that went with that. So what I was uncomfortable with from the very beginning was sort of the punitive nature of this. We're gonna get them, or we're upset with liquor sales in general, so we're going to show them. We had some of that tone tonight, and I just don't think it's fair. And, you know, I'll say life's not fair and all that, but this isn't fair from an economic and a retailer vendor perspective. I think Brown Jug's initiative and the debate and the discussions that we had there was active in the volunteer nature of going from vendor to vendor, store to store, retailer to retailer on the 100% carding solution that subsequently broke down. And I think that to me was an initiative that said, hey, if they'll do it, we'll do it, and more so. I think others card 100% because they don't do anything else. They don't look to see who's in the car out front. They don't get out and meet their customers. And I shop at Brown Jug because I feel confident that they're a responsible retailer. My kids, some are of drinking age and some are not. And I get a sense that Brown Jug watches who their customers are from the public safety perspective. And to me, I'm impressed with that. I've had underage employees when I ran my company that were making deliveries in their store, and they got the civil penalties charges against them because they were underage, had 20-year-old drivers. These folks go nth degree with a package of discipline for their employees as opposed to the solution that 100% carding is going to fix DUIs or it's going to fix public inebriation. It doesn't do that. I commend them for that, and it's punitive to say this one store will be fixed by this, or the public social problems will be fixed by this one store being corrective. The issue that some of us speak to is such that it's sort of, and no offense to those that say it, is you're sort of posturing here. Get on with it. If you've got a community and neighborhood-wide problem, then pull the conditional uses. That's what I did tonight. Pull them and start to apply what you feel is the best solution to those. I've done it with my local Walmart, in that. And it's an active, engaged part from a legislator who has a constituent concern. Pull them. Don't wait for them to come up. Go get them. Go get the conditional uses and add language that speaks to it. I'll help you do it. As you see those that are the violators in the required areas of town or continued use or just won't play ball any other way, then pull them and add it. It's relatively easy to do. We gave adequate public notice to the community. We blue staked the community, and we've seen it through 2 meetings here. It works. But so does the other things that Brown Jug works. The initiatives that they have for the civil and the follow through with their employee reward systems and that should be the models for other vendors. Really come down hard on those that make alcohol consumption evil, but don't penalize the ones that go out and drink. It's not against the law to buy alcohol, and when you do it legally, it's not against the law. The neighborhood cleanup programs, the suggestion that they actively engage in marketing programs, the awards that they win are that standard for other vendors that we can use and say, hey, do it like them. I'm proud to say that. I don't want to have communicative and debate that sends a message wrong to these folks. And we've done a little bit of that tonight, and I think this restriction number 6 that needs to go away does that. If, in fact, they can't perform at the level or we can prove back unequivocally that there's camps and all the other stuff related to this store, then I'll be the first one to bring it back. That's all. Thank you.
Any other discussion from assembly members? Not seeing any. Please vote. The item was approved. Next item in front of us is item 14A, resolution AR 2010-222, resolution appropriating $522,000 from Federal Highway Administration. Thank you. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wish to testify, please come forward. State your name clearly for the record and spell your last name, please. Anyone at all? Seeing no one, public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body? Move to second discussion from assembly members. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, item is approved, Madam Clerk. Next item in front of us, item 14B, AR 2010-226, resolution appropriating $350,000 from Alaska Center for the Performing Arts. Thank you. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wish to testify, please come forward, state your name clearly for the record. Anyone at all? Hearing and saying no, in public hearing, this item is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Discussion from assembly members? Doesn't appear to be any. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, Madam Clerk, that item is approved. Item 14C, AR 2010-227, a resolution appropriating $566,214 as a contribution from Alaska Pacific University, APU. Thank you. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wish to testify, please come forward, state your name clearly for the record, and spell your last name. You'll have 3 minutes. Anybody at all wishing to testify? Hearing and seeing no one, public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body? Discussion from assembly members. Mr. Honeman.
Yes, just to the administration, I did put the question. I think the other fellow assembly persons probably saw the question into it. I know that they talked about future, just looking into the conceptual design phase of this project, but I'd urge you strongly to make sure that we get something in writing for resolutions of some sort to the community councils. I know the area community council, university, tutor area, there's bound to be some pretty much like the previous public hearing we heard on the alcohol industry. This is another area that's going to be, so I just urge you strongly.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir?
Mr. Honeman, we will be doing that. We're going to do the full public involvement process before this gets too far along. Again, it's just beginning.
Could you speak in the microphone? We're having problems picking you up.
It's good just going into the design process now. And once we get preliminary design, we'll be able to go out and do the public involvement, go to the community councils, and that will be I'm sure, a very high-profile project.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other discussion from assembly members? Seeing none, ask unanimous consent on this item. Seeing no objection, Madam Clerk, that item is approved unanimously. We're going to move on to item 14D, AO 2010-54, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, amending Anchorage Municipal Code 1.15.0352 to provide additional restrictions on the employment of elected officials for 1 year after leaving municipal service. Public hearing on this item is now open. Anybody wishing to testify, please come forward. State your name clearly for the clerk. Anyone at all? Hearing and saying no, and public testimony is closed. What's the wish of the body?
Second.
Debbie?
I was kind of surprised when I saw this, frankly. It appears to be targeted at a particular situation, though since there's no grandfathering language, I guess it wouldn't affect him, but it does appear, frankly, to be specifically written to prohibit an assembly member to come back and give oversight over something they worked on. And I think that we'd all lose if that happened. My experience with this body has been that we often get really complex things that come before us, and I basically trust people who have more experience in an area to give me advice. I try to listen, but frankly, I don't have time to delve into every issue with the depth that it sometimes needs and warrants. For instance, I have really been learning a lot from Mr. Flynn about port issues. No, I thank you. He's got the experience, he's got the expertise, we're dealing with it, and he's put more time in it than anybody. Ms. Johnston, recycling and compost. Didn't we call her the recycling queen because she spent... No, Ms. Johnston. Because you spent the time in it and you had the expertise. Mr. Honeman and his police background. We're going to use that. We already have used that. He's got opinions about and knowledge about explicit things in that area. Well, frankly, Title 21 is complicated. I've spent a lot of time in that. Mr. Coffey has spent even more time than I have because, as an attorney, he worked in this area before he came on the body. I think that to say it's not allowed to come back when you have a particular skill set that could benefit the community at large on a particular issue is not necessarily going to benefit us at all. I appreciate very much that Mr. Coffey went ahead and got a ethics clearance before he went ahead and decided to sign the contract with the city. But when we wrote this ethics ordinance, we specifically wrote it, and I had at least looked at this provision with some interest, because at the time there was a fair amount of discussion about Mr. Wolforth working for Mayor Begich. I think that this doesn't serve any good purpose for the city, and I will not be supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Michaelis, I broached this question with you when we met earlier, and you told me that contract with Mr. Coffey is in effect currently. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct. It was executed on the 26th of July.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On this EO, sir.
Yeah, following up precisely on that issue. Ms. Tucker, would appreciate your perspective on this. I believe Ms. Osiander is correct. Would you please confirm this would not, if we enacted this tonight, this would not affect the contract executed between the municipality and Mr. Coffey, correct?
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Flynn, that is correct.
Okay. And if the rumor is true that with Mr. Jones' impending retirement that the mayor wants to hire Dr. Selcraig to take his job, would that be precluded under this legislation if we were to enact it?
I believe that that would depend on the timing, through the chair, Mr. Flynn.
Presuming
that is that if 1 year had passed, then it would not affect that. If 1 year had not passed, then this would require that to happen by competitive bid. That is, that it doesn't prohibit the hiring of somebody within the first year of leaving office. It just says that that needs to be by a competitive solicitation if it's a contract. And if it's a direct hire, then the prohibition is only if the position was created during the elected officials' last year of service, or if there was, I think, I forget what that requirement is, maybe an increase. So that's the charter requirement, and so it doesn't affect that.
Okay. So in other words, if any of our fellow former colleagues were to be sought out by the administration for a hire, they couldn't take a position that was new or for which the remuneration had increased in the last year of their service.
Right. If the salary or the benefits were specially increased during the elected officials' last year of office, and that's a charter requirement.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Tucker. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. First, I'd like to thank Ms. Osiander for her comments regarding assembly members who have expertise in certain areas, and I'm a little hurt that you didn't mention my expertise in budget areas, but I'm sure you forgot. And let me just start out by saying, believe it or not, this ordinance is not about a prior assembly member, also known as Mr. Coffey. I will say this, I had a misunderstanding about how the charter worked, and the fact that I'd heard he was getting a contract helped me to look into it more, because quite frankly, I had thought for some time that it was already on the books that assembly member number one could not have a paid municipal job until a year after employment, for starters. Okay? And I wasn't too familiar with the contract part, but I really believe that, like Ms. Osiander said, there are a lot of us who have expertise, and quite frankly, we could save a lot of time if indeed we looked to one of our colleagues who was no longer an assembly member for help and moving situations along within this municipality. But with that said, I still think that it's really, really important, and that's why I have this in this ordinance, that although you may have the expertise, it's what it looks like to the public. I think that we need to, no matter what, continue to maintain the public's trust, especially in periods of economic downturn. It's just absolutely 100% essential. Doesn't mean that, you know, you're not in the running, because you can bid on a contract, and the likelihood of somebody who's been on this body and has expertise getting that contract is probably good. But in all fairness, other folks within this community are given the opportunity to bid on a contract too, and I just think that it's simply fair. I think that, you know, basically what we're doing also is supplementing the charter provision by adopting amendments to the current code that support competitive solicitation. I think this is a really good ordinance. I think that it needs to be on the book. And when you think about what's happening in our state in terms of at the state level, and also our colleagues in Wasilla recognize the need to put an ordinance like this one on the books, I just think that it's simply the right thing for us to do. It's good public policy, and I don't see anything wrong with it, quite frankly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Burt, sir.
I just had a question regarding the, and I'm trying to think of an instance where this has actually come to pass, and it predates my term in the Assembly, but was Joe Murdy, did he
Joe
come
Murdy
back?
was on the body with me and came back to work with the next administration.
Okay.
He was over planning for a while, yes,
Okay.
sir.
And we mentioned Charles Wolforth, but I think that was a long period of time. It seems to me like there's more than a year passed, but I guess I don't see this as a really
93 time frame, in the 195 time frame.
I think the intent is appropriate here, but I guess I just am a little fuzzy on just how frequently this has happened over the, since and I don't know if there's anybody, you've probably got as much institutional knowledge here, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I do.
So
it's never happened before. It doesn't happen occasionally, like with Joe Murdy or like Charles Wolforth, but it just doesn't happen that often.
Okay, thank you.
For example, with Mr. Coffey and his expertise in Title 21, that may be a viable occurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was kind of alluded to. I was not aware that this wasn't in the ethics language. I went back and gave more pause to it. But since we just recently came through a rather public and heated discussion over issues confronting the ethics laws, and recently 2 appointments at the state level that were called into question and, in fact, found to be illegal, or at least some question to that. Apparently there was some resignations for it. I guess there wasn't, to be fair, there wasn't really an actual finding, I guess, through the courts. But I don't see where this is a huge issue, and I support it because I think it's again, it goes back to the level of gaining the public trust in elected officials, and I'll do my part as long as I am one to try to continue to further that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am.
I too wanted to point out that this would not, if this was in place, Mr. Coffey could have competitively bid for this contract. This would not have prevented him from getting the contract if he was best suited for it, according to the department. And I will be supporting this. I think it's just good government. I think it puts us in alignment with what the state is doing, and as previous speakers have mentioned, that they have stumbled over the last few years, and I think we just need to retain the trust of the public and pass this item. Thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think first I want to clear up a misconception, maybe a misreading. Again, there is absolutely nothing in this that would preclude a former assembly member from taking a job under contract with the municipality. It would, however, have to be competitively bid, and I think the purpose for that is spelled out very clearly in the paragraph. Unless the contract is competitively bid, and I'm starting on line 12 of the last page, and the purchasing officer determines in writing for publication by the municipal clerk that the integrity of the public solicitation process has not been adversely affected. And I think what that makes very clear to people is, yes, this person was somebody's political ally and now they've got a contract with the city, but it's perfectly legitimate. And I think it's there for the whole world to see, which in my mind would protect me as a potential contractor. You know, there will always be those who will stand up and cry foul and say that there's some sort of dirty pool going on, but I would be able to hold this up and say, look, I competitively bid on this, and so it's clean. You know, with many other things, we are extremely cautious with the public's money, and when we have a bid process, we talk about oftentimes the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And if an assembly member had the expertise and the knowledge and wanted to bid on a contract, it seems odd to me that they wouldn't have to bid just like any other member of the public would have to bid on a contract. It seems odd to me that we would treat former elected officials different and give them some sort of preference that we wouldn't give the general public. And now I know we also have a threshold below which we have no bid contracts, and the specific contract that has been talked about tonight, I believe, falls under that category. That's not something that would come to this body anyway. But I think that just for, you know, to maintain an abundance of caution and to show the public very clearly that there's no hanky-panky going on here in any future contract, whether it happens often or not, I think the public is somewhat jaded these days because of what we've seen in the news about contracts coming out of Juneau and jobs in Juneau. I think it behooves us to take this seriously and to pass that. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Starr, sir.
You know, the perception that the public would have that hanky-panky is going on, what I see happening here is that there is more of an incentive now than for the mayor or somebody else to just hire this person into government. We've just basically said, you know, you're going to have to contract out for your job, and if you don't want to do that, why don't we just hire you?
That would be illegal within a year.
No.
Yeah.
Point of order.
Gentlemen,
Only,
no discussion, please.
which was created, the salary benefits were specifically increased during that person's last year in office. So if Mr. Jones is leaving and Mr. Coffey wanted to be appointed to that job, there's nothing that would preclude that. So I get this sense that we're sort of meddling in the executive branch again here for pointless purpose, really, that doesn't present itself very well. We have that contracting requirement already, as Mr. Gutierrez spoke about, below the threshold, and I guess you're trying to bring it into a way that now we're going to circumvent that. But I think we're just driving these people to become employees of the municipality through political favors, and that's not the process that I would want to see happen after this. And that's really, I think, why I'm going to vote no.
Now we're back. We're going to have people come in for the second time on this issue. Ms. Osiander?
And I apologize. I did not intend to speak again, but I want to correct a misstatement. The statement was made that this would cause this person's hire to be treated as every other person's hire is treated, and that is not true. We do not require competitive, how is this worded? Competitively bid when people are hired by the administration. I know of no position that is competitively bid. So basically, it would create a special circumstance just for this person. And again, this is unnecessary. It's not needed. Urge vote against.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I just want to correct a misunderstanding, and maybe I didn't hear what I think I heard, but I think Mr. Starr was basically saying that right now that this ordinance does not prevent an assembly member from having a job with the municipality. But let me just be clear. What this ordinance does is it prevents an elected official, school board members, mayor, and assembly members from having a paid position within the municipality as an employee until 1 year after they leave office. And the second issue, in terms of contracts that Ms. Osiander was speaking of, when it comes to employment, no, you don't have to competitively bid on a job. But right now, the competitive bid process is in place for certain contracts within the municipality of Anchorage. So this wouldn't be anything that's brand new just for former elected officials, by no means. And Ms. Tucker, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just one point is, don't forget it would affect us too. If in fact we decided we had a colleague on this body, or no matter what, male or female, that we needed their expertise, we could not hire them for a year after they were on the body. It's not just the executive branch, it's our branch too. Mr. Gutierrez, your second bite on this apple, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gray Jackson mostly took care of it. But your statement is absolutely correct. We could not hire them as an employee for a period of 1 year following their service. We could, however, hire them as a contractor to deal with an issue, provided it was competitively bid and that it was very clear to the public that this was an above-board process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Starr, your second bite at the apple?
Well, the summary that you guys have packaged it into, maybe I'm just missing it here. Julia, can you tell me now what prevents the mayor from taking a previously elected official and giving him an executive appointment as an employee with no work contract, no nothing? He just hires him into staff. Position's been there before, the special assistant position in the mayor's office. Can you get one in less than a year after leaving the elected office?
I'm going to answer that this way, Mr. Starr, through the chair.
Speak in the microphone, ma'am.
I'm going to answer your question this way, through the chair, Mr. Starr, that under present code, without this amendment, the restriction is that neither the administration nor the assembly could hire an elected official within 1 year of that person's employment if, A, the salary and benefits were specially increased during that public official's last year of office, or B, the position was created during that person's last year of office. Those are the restrictions now. Under this ordinance, those exceptions, those limited exceptions to the prohibition are removed so that under this ordinance, as Mr. Honeman and others, as the sponsors have explained, under this ordinance, there would be no, for 1 year after an elected official left office, there would be no direct hire. The contracting could be accomplished through competitive solicitation.
Okay, gentlemen, I know your sidebar is interesting. Pat?
Yeah, one final question for Ms. Tucker, if I might, when she's ready. Ms. Tucker, one final question. About, 18 months ago, this body considered, it was 2 years ago now, this body considered an ordinance that said, notwithstanding any other restrictions in Anchorage Municipal Code, the ethics restrictions on a particular person being hired are waived. Were we to come up with a similar circumstance with a former elected member of this body, if this were enacted, say the mayor wanted to hire Mr. Starr for something, could we similarly enact an ordinance that would allow for that hire to take place?
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Starr, unless you are violating the, excuse me, yes, Mr. Flynn, through the chair, unless the job was specifically created or the salary and benefits were specially enhanced during the elected member's last year of service. And you would not be able to do that by ordinance because that prohibition is in the charter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tucker.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler, anything, sir? Your light's on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I read page 2, this paragraph number 2, the prohibition would include school board members, and it would mean, as I read it, that a school board member who decided to run for the assembly or the mayor could not hold those positions if they're considered to be compensated municipal office or employment.
That throws a wrench into it. So as you're looking at, let me get this straight, Mr. Wheeler, you're saying that a school board member could not run for the assembly or run for mayor? Is that what you're saying, Dennis?
That is the question, sir. It says cannot hold compensated municipal office or employment. So
maybe they do it without being compensated.
I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Just wanted to point out that may be a concern.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, a question along those lines?
Go ahead.
Mr. Wheeler,
have a whole new can of worms.
No, that's a great point. No, it is unintended consequences, everything we do. If we added the word unelected, so I'm looking for the right phrase, holds no unelected compensated municipal office, would that alleviate that? Or is there a more elegant way to handle it than that?
Through the chair, Mr. Gutierrez, I think we could probably come up with something that would get to that issue. That may work, but I need a little time to think it through.
Right. I know. We're working on the fly. Ms. Tucker, an opinion from you on that question?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Gutierrez, I'm not sure that the words municipal office which are not added or subtracted by the amendment, actually even belong in this section this way. So I'd have to kind of look at that, because even the way the code reads without the amendment, the problem is there that Mr. Wheeler points out. So,
Julia, could I interrupt you for a minute? Elvie, make your motion, please,
Thank you,
ma'am.
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move to postpone this. Actually, I'd like to continue the public hearing.
And we closed.
Oh, we closed it. Sorry
We
about
closed
that.
the public hearing, ma'am.
Sorry.
You want to
I'd like
postpone
move
that
to-
in for 2 weeks to our next meeting?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Go ahead,
I'd
ma'am.
like to postpone action on this ordinance until the next meeting.
I'll second that.
Ask unanimous, seeing no objection. That's approved. And Mr. Gray Jackson, that gives you time to get with our legal and the municipal attorney to figure out. Dennis,
Thank you, Mr.
that's an
Chairman.
interesting little point that you turned everything on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this has been forwarded to the school board, but you might consider it. Okay, thank you.
We've got
Sorry,
2
Mr.
weeks.
Chairman, yes, it has.
Next item in front of us, item 14E, ordinance AO 2010-50, an ordinance amending English Municipal Code sections 21.35.020.
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Osiander,
before we open the public hearing,
before we open public hearing. Ma'am,
this is wind towers, if you want to.
this is the wind tower one.
Since S version of I don't have it here today. There was a little bit of a miscommunication. So it's my intent to continue the public hearing to our next meeting. So if you're interested in this topic, you may want to wait till you see the substitute version that the Title 21 committee has come up with.
Public hearing, this item is now open. If you wish to testify, come forward and do it on this item. But keep in mind, if you testify now, you will not be able to when the S version gets here at our next meeting. I would suggest you wait until you see the S version, because we don't know what differences there are between this version and the S version. It's up to you.
Mr. Trainee, if it would
Yes,
help.
ma'am.
If it would help, we could real quickly summarize the 2 or 3 things we did.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Our main concern was proximity of wind towers to residential homes. And so we added a provision that said that you have to notify your neighbors, and if the majority of your neighbors object, then you're going to have some real problems doing it. And we also said that there should be some provision for visual impact of a wind tower.
I think you have the restriction, too. They have to be at least 25 feet tall. I mean, from the ground, there is a level at which you can't get down to.
Well, the main prohibition is that there's a setback requirement that says that you have to be at least 1.1 times the height of the tower from your neighbor. We also took out the limitation on lot size because we thought that the setback prohibition would be enough. But I apologize for not having the S version here. There was a miscommunication.
So if any wishes to testify, please come forward, state your name clearly for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes. Spell your last name, please. If not, then you'll get to testify at the next assembly meeting when we've got the full-blown S version here. Deb, would you make the motion to continue public hearing until the next meeting?
I move to continue the public hearing on this matter till our next meeting.
Second.
Thank you.
Ask unanimous. Seeing no objection, that's accomplished. We're now done with the agenda. We're now down to special orders. There are none. Unfinished agenda. There is none.
Mr. Chairman?
Audience participation. Yes, sir.
Did we ask if Mr. Morgan made it for?
No, we can ask that, though. Did Mr. Morgan make it here? He was under appearance request. He's not here yet.
Thanks, sir.
We're now down to audience participation, item 17. If anybody, and sir, you've been waiting for a long time, thank you. Come and talk to us.
Hello, my name is Christopher Constant, C-O-N-S-T-A-N-T, and I came here tonight for an unusual order of business. And while I was here, I'm usually here to grind an axe or to tell a story about something that's not going so well in my neighborhood. And I have issues that are working their way through the municipal process that I trust. And I would say both the administration as well as the Assembly are doing their duty in the process of keeping honesty and keeping the hanky-panky out of the Assembly's and the city's business. You had a department director here earlier who I think was afraid of me being here because suddenly a proponent of a project I'm against showed up 2/3 of the way through the meeting. And so I think I'm on the trail of something, but that's not why I'm here. I'm actually here to say thank you. And thanks is due. I sent you all an email, but I figured that on a slow meeting night that it's a rare opportunity to come and be able to say the city works. And here's how the city works. It's unusual. Last week, 2 weeks ago, Friday, Fairview Community Council was organizing a celebration, a block party for its community, my neighbors. And as an all-volunteer group, we work really hard to get everything in order. And as a lot of you know, getting everything in order can be really challenging. You have to get applications and permits and documents, and everyone has to say yes along the way. All the while, we were dealing with an issue that's very painful and difficult for our neighborhood, but we are going to celebrate. And by golly, Friday at 4:45 p.m., I get a call that says we don't have our health and we don't have our sound permits. That's 4:45 on a Friday. So I immediately called Angela Chambers in planning because I've had a few dealings with her lately. She didn't know what to do, but she put me in touch with another person in planning who would likely have the permit, but no one was in their office. It was getting later. The clock was ticking. It was 2 minutes until 5 o'clock on Friday before my block party the next morning, and I didn't have a permit. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I called the municipal clerk's office. Thank God the phone was picked up by Amanda Mosier. Behind the scenes, I didn't know it. I thought that it was Barbara because she's someone I've worked with before, but Jacqueline here immediately got on the phone and had Diane Ingles on the phone. We had our permit applications ready. We were in order, but something was lost in the shuffle. So by 5:45, on Friday evening, I'd heard that everything was okay, that we had what we needed and that we could go ahead. And that next morning, the chief food inspector, his name escapes me right now, showed up and signed off the permit. And we were legal, and we celebrated. And though the rain may not have cooperated, we still had hundreds of people show up in our neighborhood where we demonstrated our neighborhood plan to the community and showed our neighbors what our plans are for the community and that there is a bright future for Fairview. And now, immediately after that, after months of work and a party, 2 hours later I left town for a family vacation to a 60th birthday party for one of my family members. And I told the story of how the entire administration, the Assembly's clerk, everyone flexed with me and worked at the last minute to get the job done. And no one believes me. And I'm here in person to say thank you and to ask you to thank the people that you have hired to do the work, because even though it is an expectation that you'd be open at 2 minutes till 5 on Friday, I sure was grateful that it was reality. And with that, I'll just end my comment.
Mr. Gutierrez has a question. Mr. Gutierrez?
No, just thank you, Christopher. We hear, like most people, we usually only hear when there are complaints. But I think all 11 of us up here know we've got some amazing people who work for this body, and they're terrific. And thank you for reinforcing that and letting us know. We appreciate your time.
Thanks again.
Mr. Flynn, sir?
Just, Christopher, thanks to you and all the folks at the Fairview Community Council who put on a terrific event. I'm very sorry. I was on my way back to town when it took place, but great job.
It'll be happening again.
Yeah, I'll be there next year.
All right. Again, thank you.
There are no other questions. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
And Amanda and Jacqueline, thank you very much. You reflect best on what the city does. Thanks, both of you, for everything you do. Appreciate it. Anybody else wish to address this eminent issue? Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Dave Walsh, and from 1976 to 86, I sat on that side of the table. And I live in New York now. I come back to visit my daughter and son-in-law and our grandchildren frequently, but it's generally during the holidays when it's cold and there's a lot of snow, and this is the first time I've been back in the summer for a long time. Unfortunately, I'm here for Senator Stevens' service tomorrow. But I just wanted to say it was great sitting and watching this meeting. It made me feel that I had hair again and that I was young and sitting on that side of the table. But more importantly, the city looks great, and it's wonderful to see that this room, which we designed when I was on the Assembly, is still as functional and still looks as good as it did when we moved in 80 or 81. So I won't take up any more of your time, Mr. Chairman. If I may, Mr. Flynn, say hi to your mom with whom I served. Ernie, it's nice to see you again. And God bless. Thank you.
Stay here. We have something in common. You and I both served with Heather.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You came on right after I got
Oh, yes. We have a few people that want to talk to you.
Okay.
Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Dave. Do you remember me?
I do.
Oh, yeah, when you ran for mayor and I worked on your campaign and I got tired on election night, I went home and I was sitting in front of the TV and I saw that you were losing and I said, God, I got to go back down there. And I did. But it's really great to see you.
Well, you and a lot of other people worked very hard. I wish that I had been as good a candidate as you guys were volunteers.
Thank you.
Mr. Honeman has
I didn't recognize you without the beard, Mr. Bush. I thank you for your service to the community, and I too remember fondly the 1987 election where we were competitors at the time, and neither one of us won. So we had something in common, didn't we?
But life is long.
Thank you, Dave, for everything you did, designing this room. I only have one objection. I wish you had put us down about 5 feet lower, so we had to look up at the person testifying. I think that would have given us a better sense of perspective on the people testifying.
There was actually a big debate about that, and the shape of the room, and you would think we were designing the Sistine Chapel at the time.
We were working with Lydia at the time.
Yeah.
And I know the kind of debates she would have. Lydia was my old professor. I did my master's in planning. And she would keep us for hours arguing about one little thing. You were with Fred Chai then, weren't you, too?
Fred Chai, Don Smith, who I understand is now on the school board.
Yes, he is.
15 or 20, probably more than that, people over the 10 years.
Was Faulkner on it when you were on there?
Yeah, Bill Faulkner. He had the other West Anchorage seat.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being back in town.
Thank you all.
Anybody else wish to address the Assembly? That concludes our agenda. We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. We're adjourned.
Mr. Chair?
No comments?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to remind people that if you wanted to see the cortege of Senator Stevens passing, I believe it's left downtown at 8 p.m. and is going down Minnesota Drive and east to the Anchorage Baptist Temple on Benson Boulevard in Northern Lights. So I think we just might have time to see it if we all head up to Benson.